the unseen artist. It all began with the flowers. At first, I thought they were from a secret admirer, simple, innocent bouquets left on my doorstep. But as the days passed, the gifts became more personal and more invasive. An old, worn doll with a note that read, "For my favorite." Left on my windowsill, a lock of hair that looked eerily similar to mine. Each new gift filled me with a growing sense of dread. I didn't realize it at the time, but this was the beginning of the end of my once happy and peaceful life. I live alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. I've always appreciated my solitude, finding a certain peace in the quiet moments to myself. But now, the isolation that once felt comforting fills me with an oppressive sense of dread. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, sets my nerves on edge. One night, as I was settling into bed, I noticed something out of place. A small, red dot on the wall opposite of my bed. It moved slightly, then disappeared. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the feeling of being watched persisted. It was as if unseen eyes were always on me, studying my every move. Days turned into weeks, and my sense of unease grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was constantly watching me, lurking just out of sight. Then, the phone call started. It always began with silence on the other end of the line, with just the barely audible sound of their breathing to let me know someone was there. I held the fantasy that it was just some silly prank call by someone with too much time on their hands, though deep down I knew that wasn't the case. My worst fears were soon proven true when the voice finally decided to speak to me. "I see you. Do you see me?" It whispered, sending chills down my spine. I went to the police, but there was little they could do. Without concrete evidence, they couldn't take any action. They advised me to change my number and be cautious. I felt helpless, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. One evening, as I returned home from work, I found my front door open. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, calling out nervously. Silence greeted me, but the sense of violation was overwhelming. Someone had been in my home. I walked into my bedroom and froze. On the wall, written in red paint, were the words, "My special girl." Below it was a detailed charcoal drawing of me sleeping, every line and shadow eerily accurate. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He had been in my room, watching me as I slept. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Lisa. I explained everything to her, and she urged me to contact the police again. This time, they took it more seriously. They assigned a patrol car to watch my apartment, but somehow I knew it wouldn't be enough. Despite my attempts to stay safe, the stalker always seemed to be one step ahead. He sent me letters, detailing intimate moments of my life, things only someone close to me would know. He described the way I laughed, the way I brushed my hair, the books I read before bed. It was as if he was always there, an invisible presence haunting my every moment. One night, while staying at Lisa's, I woke to find a figure standing at the foot of the bed. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the figure. The moment my gaze met his cold, lifeless eyes, I knew it had to be him. As my stalker came closer to me, I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He moved with a sickening slowness, savoring my fear. "I've waited so long for this," he whispered. I could feel my heart pounding faster and faster with each step he took. "You and we're going to create something beautiful," he said. I scrambled off the bed, desperate to escape, but he was too fast. He grabbed me, his grip like iron. I fought back, trying my best to break free. But it was no use. The last thing I remember was the sharp pain of the knife and the twisted smile he had. When I woke, I was in a dark, damp basement, my hands bound and my mouth gagged. He stood over me, admiring his work. The room was filled with sketches and photographs of me, my life documented in obsessive detail. "You'll be my masterpiece," he said, his voice filled with perverted adoration. The days that followed were a blur of pain and terror. He reveled in my suffering, taking pleasure in every cry, every plea for mercy. He had a routine. Every morning he would start with a grotesque art session, where he would cut into my skin with precise, deliberate strokes, watching the blood flow with a sick fascination. He would then take photos, capturing my agony from different angles, treating each wound like a brushstroke on a canvas. In the afternoons, he would sit me in front of a mirror, forcing me to watch as he painted over my body with my own blood. He'd whisper in my ear, describing how each mark represented a part of my soul, how he was turning my pain into something beautiful. He derived a perverse pleasure from my suffering, his eyes lighting up with twisted glee every time I flinched or cried out. At night, he would tie me to a chair and recount his progress in a journal, detailing each act of torment with meticulous care. He would play recordings of my screams, overlaying them with classical music, calling it his symphony of despair. His delight in my torment was evident. Each session an intimate performance for his sadistic pleasure. I lost track of time. My world reduced to a never-ending cycle of torment. But one day, the routine changed. He came to me, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing excitement. "Our time together is coming to an end," he said, a chilling smile on his lips. "But we'll meet again. Someday soon." I assumed he just meant that today's session was over. Of course, that left me with little comfort. I was still stuck in this unending cycle of torment. My suffering would begin anew tomorrow, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I wanted to cry, but no tears came out. My eyes had long ran dry after countless days of crying before. So I decided to sleep. I would need my rest if I wanted to survive his next round of torment. When I woke up the next day, I was surprised to not see his figure looming nearby. Something was wrong. He was never late. He'd always followed his precise routine. My first instinct was to assume the worst. Perhaps he was preparing some new way to torture me. I waited there for half a day before someone entered. But to my shock, instead of being greeted by his cold, twisted grin, I was confronted by a group of officers. I was at a daze to see them in front of me. It took what felt like hours for me to realize it was real, that I was finally free of the nightmare. I was a shell of my former self by the time the police had got here. They could see I was still trying to reel in from everything that was going on. They did their best to assure me that everything was going to be okay, that the monster who had tormented me would finally be locked away. But days turned into weeks, and the hope began to wither. They hadn't caught him. He was still out there, lurking in the shadows. His last chilling words came back to haunt me. "Our time together is coming to an end, but we'll meet again someday soon." I realized he wasn't just talking about that session. Whatever he had planned for me was far from over. The knowledge that he was still out there, and likely watching me, shattered what little sanity I had left. I couldn't stand to be alone anymore. I moved in with my sister Julie, desperate for the safety of numbers. But even in the comfort of her crowded household, the fear never left me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind, made me jump. I felt his eyes on me constantly, a silent observer to my unraveling. The police did their best, monitoring the house and keeping a close watch. They even assigned officers to follow me. But it was never enough. The feeling of being watched never left. Julie tried to comfort me, reminding me that the police were doing everything they could. But I knew better. He was always one step ahead. I became a prisoner in my own mind, every moment tainted by the dread of his return. I could feel him savoring my descent into madness, letting me crumble under the weight of fear before our paths crossed again. I try to convince myself that someday they will catch him. But deep down, I know the truth. He's still out there watching, waiting. And the next time we meet, there will be no escape.